I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, here to wrap up UTSA's 41-20 win over the UAB Blazers in the American Athletic Conference home opener. Greg, Roadrunners do it in all three phases today. Probably the most complete game we've seen out of UTSA this season. The Roadrunners jump up 14-0 on UAB really early in the game and kind of never look back from there.
Did you see this coming?
I did not. I thought it was going to be a little bit closer than this. I want to say I think you might have seen this one coming.
I don't do predictions, but we were walking around pregame, and one of the students asked me, "Hey, what do you think for the score today?" And I said 41. I said 37-20.
Yeah.
So I was really close because
Right.
I think just watching UTSA go through warm-ups, to see the guys who are back, to see Danya Taylor without the big leg brace,
Right.
to see Trey Moore
Moving around
and
pretty
he ended
good.
up coming out of the game for a second, but he ended up with 3.5 sacks, and he looks like he's kind of back.
Yeah.
To have Frank Harris out there, and still some guys on the mend. You got Mekhi Hart coming back. You got DeCorian Clark, obviously. We can talk about that later. Was not even dressed today, but generally it feels like the momentum is trending the right way with what we saw from UTSA last week. And if you want to draw a differentiation between non-conference and conference and say, well, which one's real? We've seen this team score in the top 15 nationally, close to 37 points per game the last two seasons. So it's easy to believe that they're going to have these kind of offensive showings on a regular basis. And UAB, it seems like they had moved some guys around and found some things, but they're still a team that is what their record is. And I think UTSA was just better than them, and I think that they proved it today in a lot of different ways. So I feel like, the start, it doesn't get any better than that, right? They come down and score, and then 2 tackles for loss for Danye. Trey Moore gets a strip sack, and score again right away. So, yeah, from there it was off to the races. It felt like, I know UAB made it close, but UTSA led wire to wire.
I don't think any of the stats from the offense are going to jump out real huge in this one. 360-something total yards.
Right.
40 points. You can't discount.
Well, the defense hasn't given them this kind of a short field because they haven't forced these turnovers before.
2 games in a row they've done that.
And then they were critical last week. They both led the touchdowns, and they came at critical times like we talked about in that video. And again here, they got them, especially to get that hot start, but then in the second half to sort of slow some of the momentum and come up with those interceptions. And good for Cam Alexander because he had his wiped out last week and then was able to get one, and then Elliot Davison to kind of ice it at the end. And those are the plays that make a difference because people can get really excited about the defensive performance, and there's probably good reason to. In some cases, there was 5 sacks, which is good, and the 12 tackles for losses is a season high, and they created some negative plays, but there were still times in this game where it felt like tackling was an issue, where the guys were getting some big chunk gains, and there were things that could have been pretty alarming, and that's how UAB kept it within 1 score for a significant chunk of this game. But when you have a high-powered offense, you get to take risks on defense.
Yeah.
And if you come up with a couple negative plays, that's all it takes. You just need to steal a couple possessions here and there. You don't have to be perfectly sound defensively, which is, it felt like what was being asked of that group in the non-conference season because the offense was averaging under 20 points a game.
A solid defensive effort, I think. You mentioned the 12 season-high tackles for loss. It seemed like the aggressiveness, I don't know if it was cranked up today a little bit. Obviously, I think they got beat a few times on some over-pursuit stuff, but I guess how would you grade the defense?
Sometimes it feels like under-pursuit, like they let guys get the sideline weirdly. I don't know, I haven't noticed that in years past. It was a weird thing that started to jump out again today. But generally, I thought that, Trey Moore said after the game that they did a lot of just winning their one-on-ones. It was like not necessarily a huge number of blitz calls, and they just made it work with the 4-man front or whatever the front looked like on that play. And I think there were a couple times where it seemed like safety blitzes got home. It was Ken Robinson, I don't think, got a sack, and Rashad Wisdom did get one, but they both created some pressure coming off the from deep in the secondary, which is not a look that teams see very often.
Right.
So I think there were times that they created some pressure with calls, and there were times that these guys just won up front. Trey Moore was all over the place. It sounded like he was able to make a lot of disruptions in the backfield, and there were times that Jamori Robinson joined him in there was one where they met for a sack, and I don't know who got credit for that one in the end. But generally speaking, I thought that they were every bit as disruptive as you would want to be. And it's like I said, you just have to make a couple negative plays that can get you off the field once in a while. If you get beat for some chunk gains, as long as your offense is going to score 40, you can get away with that if you're trading it for getting a stop here and there.
Is this the best we've seen the Roadrunners in 2023? Game 6 of the season. Seems like the Roadrunners are trending up. Was the demise of the Roadrunners greatly exaggerated that first month?
Well,
of the season?
I felt part of me feels guilty when we did our video at the end of the non-conference season, and it was like, maybe we need to pump the brakes on a lot of these things that people are worried about, because it's very easy to just be positive and not be critical, and then it makes for easier interviews and things like that. But I really didn't feel like there were, I just thought a lot of those concerns seemed overblown at the time, and you can go back and watch that one. We don't have to rehash it all again. But generally speaking, this is probably the best we've seen UTSA play, and it's pretty encouraging because there's room for them to get better.
Right.
And I don't know, we can talk about this whenever you want. I don't know if JT's coming back this season. It seemed like a step backward to have him not even in uniform.
Yeah. When
he'd at least been dressing out, and it seemed like he was in the mix to potentially play some snaps. But if Mekhi Hart is close to coming back, which is what it sounds like, and Dan Dishman, I don't know how much of a difference that makes game to game, but it certainly helps to have a second tight end you can rely on and have some depth there. And then on defense, those guys are only, I mean, they could take knocks any moment, but it seems like some of these guys who are banged up, maybe it'll get a little bit easier through the year. Trey Moore's going to be managing that situation, it sounds like, but somebody like Danye could maybe get fresher and fresher somehow. So generally, I think that there's room for this trend to continue. I mean, the offense could perform at an even higher level as they get healthy and get more reps. And we've talked about what Frank went through in the offseason, the extent to which he has to knock off the rust a little bit still. He wouldn't give us much on that in post-game. I was really trying to get something out of him.
You tell him, right? That's what he said.
But he doesn't want to talk about his performance versus other times or how he feels he plays versus what his peak could be and things like that. But I think he's pretty close to that level.
Yeah.
The difference is you're not seeing him run as much.
Right.
And for that reason, there's room for them to get even more dynamic later in the year when they feel like that's something they need to rely on to get the extra yardage.
Let's nitpick a little. What are some of the areas you think that UTSA still can improve on? Maybe sticking with the run a little bit more, a little bit of play calling here and there, better tackling on defense, maybe?
I think there were times that they really hammered the run game in this one. I believe both of Kavorian's touchdowns, maybe he had like 5 straight carries, maybe both of them, I think something like that. And it was interesting to see that they felt like they could just line it up and run it at him. I don't know. I think the balance is probably where it needed to be in this one because they were successful in both. They had about even yardage.
Yeah.
I think it was a little more run than pass at the end when it finally shook out. So maybe with some sacks in there, it probably worked out to about even in terms of what was called. So I think that's sort of a fine distribution. Did you like it?
No, I thought they were a little pass happy early in the game. Maybe in the second quarter, there was a little bit of skew towards the passing, and that evened out, I thought, when it became a one-score game and the game was a little bit closer than maybe it should have been.
Yeah.
But, other than that, I have no complaints.
I mean, Robert Henry had another awesome game. He just keeps producing. It seems like it takes so much effort to tackle that guy on any given play. Like, he's always a threat to get some extra yardage or to break away and then turn it into a long run. And Kavorian Barnes is a very solid player, and he brings a lot to the table, and he can be a workhorse that can pound it away for 6 or 7 carries at a time, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see Robert Henry. I mean, we saw him on the first drive getting carries. Yeah. I would be interested to look back and see if that's happened before. I think usually Kavorian manages the first drive.
Right.
I think that we're getting closer and closer to where he's kind of the primary guy, and maybe Kavorian is secondary, which would be not a knock on Kavorian, and I think he's the type of guy who could adjust to that and be fine with it. But it does seem like Robert Henry's just the more dynamic player at this point because he's pretty special.
That's a real strong 1-2 punch there.
Right. And that's I don't think Rocco Griffin ended up playing, right?
Right, yeah.
He was off the depth chart, which was a little bit weird, and Jeff Traylor didn't give us anything on that during the week.
He suited up pregame.
But then he was warming up pregame, and one of the things I'd like to look for is he was even out there with the specialists.
Yeah.
Usually if you're even out there with the specialists, you're like closer to being good to go.
Right.
We've had guys where it was like a receiver once or twice where they were technically on there for punt return or kick return, but we didn't see them on the field until it was the proper warm-ups because they're not going to do special teams if they're not right. But I guess with him it wasn't very telling. So I don't know exactly what the situation is there, how long that could be a limitation, but it's not like they really need him, to be honest. And that's just because they have so much talent at that position.
Yeah, let's talk about JT Clark. We heard this past week the term redshirt brought up for the first time. Obviously, he hasn't played a lot this season, 2 games, a handful of snaps probably total. And he's just not back from that devastating injury last November at UAB.
It is unfortunate if they plan to go that route that they used 2 of those games to play 4 snaps where he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
But generally, I think it comes down to what he wants to do, which is a pretty obvious thing to say, but I do think he has a lot of control in this situation in terms of whether he feels like he can perform at a high enough level. If he felt like he could play 6 games that would put him on NFL radar.
Right.
I guess they have 7 if there's a bowl game and 8 if there's a conference championship. So there's plenty of opportunities for him to potentially put good stuff on film and get the NFL kind of draft type that he would want. If he thinks it's more beneficial to come back and take another lap, I think that that's something that's totally reasonable and worth considering. So I can see it going either way. I don't think it's necessarily a done deal. If he feels great the first week of December or the last week of November, would he want to just say, let me just show what I can do and then get out of here?
Yeah.
I don't know. It just sort of depends. But it's been interesting because we went from feeling like he was so far ahead of schedule early on in this, which I guess if you hear anything, that's what it's going to be. You don't usually hear that guys are behind schedule early in the recovery, but to see him suit up for the spring game, just, ceremonially, he was never going to do anything, but to see him, the extent to which he was running around, and even when we got to the fall camp practices, we saw him running some full sprints and looked fast, looked normal in that sense. But that doesn't mean you can do everything you have to do to succeed as a wide receiver on a football field. So generally it'll be a matter of when he feels like he can do that.
Yeah, you touched on it. I don't know where we were talking about, but I mean, he shredded his knee last year.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't one ligament, it was everything in the knee. And that is, even though he's cleared, like, you're not at the same performance level that you were there. And I think an important caveat is, I think he was graded in the 3rd round as a 3rd round draft selection last year. So if he were to come back and not be at that same level, that's only going to hurt.
Yeah, it's just harder to break in. And there is an argument to maybe being 1 year older makes him 1 year less enticing.
Yeah,
just people think there's probably less projectability or less room to grow necessarily. But I would say generally, if the trade-off is going into the draft when you have nothing on film, that can't be the right answer. So at that point, there would be a lot of fear, and maybe he could just blow it away at a combine workout and feel like. So, but these are all things that we don't know, and he's probably trying to get a grasp on it himself to make that decision. Because there's probably a scenario where he doesn't play all year and still decides to go. We're not going to really know until he makes a decision and shares it.
The Roadrunners are still a desperate team, Greg, according to head coach Jeff Traylor. And the
you keep needling them, apparently.
They like the jabs. They like the feeling of gripiness.
Yeah, well, it's not. They haven't been in a position where they had to talk about having a losing record before. It was all very new, and so I think we and everybody around them probably were just like, "What is it like in this moment to be feeling these things, and how are you guys processing it, and how is it impacting your culture and the mentality and the day to day?" Even if you're like, I know, like I was, and I think like you were too, where we felt like this was going to turn around.
Yeah. And
it seemed like there was a lot of reasons to be optimistic despite the 1-3 record. They still just hear all the negatives. It's very easy to hear all the negatives about you rather than people say, well, actually, we think they're kind of close. That doesn't get on your radar as much. So I think if they're going to use it to put a chip on their shoulder and it makes a difference, then good for them. But I have a feeling if they keep playing this way, it's going to get back to feeling pretty positive sooner or later.
3-3, 500 overall record, 2-0 in league play. There are 4 teams with 2-0 league records through week 7: Tulane, SMU, FAU, and UTSA. A monster game next week it's setting up for.
I know last time we talked, it was UTSA will be 7 to 10 point favorites in every game, and I think this one might be closer to 3 if I had to guess. I still think UTSA will be considered a favorite over that team, but I wouldn't be surprised if on the road that they weren't. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, FAU really put it on USF today.
Yeah.
So we'll see what that means for how the odds get set and what FAU has going on over there. I'm not going to pretend I watched that game. I'm an expert on what they have going on, but certainly that's a pretty alarming scoreline to see, and so I think that does put a little extra on next week's game. But it feels like UTSA is hitting on most, if not all, cylinders at this point. Maybe some tackling stuff to clean up, and if there's a position where you'd like to see some improvement, difference from now to the end of the year, I think the offensive line could still use some to get Mekhi Hart back. And
that'd be.
We don't know if Buffalo Cruz or Daniel Ogundipe or whoever else you want to look at from the Demetrius Allen, if it's a health situation that those guys aren't playing right now at tackle. But certainly it's not the ideal setup when you have your starting center at right tackle and a converted guard at left tackle.
Yeah.
So maybe those are just the best options. Maybe those guys, because of injuries or whatever other reason, aren't ready to perform at a starting caliber level. But if that's an area where they can shore up by the end of the year, that'll be huge. And one thing I didn't mention on our rundown, we saw Cyrus Dumas out there today, and he's potentially an impact player for them. I didn't realize that he was maybe projected to have as big of a role as he could, but it seems like, especially we saw DeJuan Griffin kind of struggle last week, and I think there was an issue here with the taunting call, and It felt like to me that we saw him on the field less after that. I don't know for sure. I'll have to look at the snap counts, but generally I think that there's room for maybe an upgrade there, especially if Dumas is the kind of player that it sounds like they think he could be. So things just keep trending up, it feels like to me. I mean, nobody else, they didn't pick up any new injuries today, I don't think.
I mean, just we'll keep an eye on how Trey Moore's, I think it's his ankle looks. It sounds like they're...
Generally, the rule of thumb is if they come talk to us after the game, they're doing all right.
Yeah, so, he said something that they figured something out to help him move around better. So I don't know if that's a brace.
It didn't appear that there was any kind of like obstruction.
Right.
In terms, like sometimes you see these. Remember the offensive lineman last year? The ankles looked ridiculous. Yeah. But there was... Maybe
that's some treatment during the week or something. Who knows? Yeah.
But he looked normal. He looked dressed as a football player should be dressed to be able to be mobile and to make 3.5 sacks.
Yeah, we sit next to each other here in the press box, and I was commenting about the offensive line, and it's wild. You're halfway through the season, and, you know, with all due respect to the guys playing offensive tackle, those aren't the guys that are supposed to be playing offensive tackle. And that, I mean, maybe that was taken for granted because of how successful UTSA was last year, because they had similar issues.
Last year was so much worse. But
yeah, but I think it's like I mentioned on one of the videos, I think it's more complex when you start moving your center around. I mean, you have your starting center at right tackle,
right,
and that's not optimal, even though that you have a good center right now. So, you know, hopefully they're able to get some of that shored up, and I think that could only help. And, you know, keeping Frank upright is huge. We saw him run today. There were no ill effects of the toe, it looked like to me.
Yeah, I don't think they called as much run.
Right.
I don't think they called any run for him, where usually that would be part of the game plan, or if this was the conference championship game, I'm sure it would have been part of the game plan today. But generally, they've taken that out the last 2 weeks from what we've seen, and he still finds opportunities to scramble. He almost died.
He got
nearly
smoked
got himself killed, so he's still willing to take a risk and run down the middle of the field. Mostly because it seems like sliding is not really part of his forte at this point. He can do literally everything else on the football field, but sliding is not one of his strengths at this point. So he takes a risk every time he takes off and scrambles with it, and he's willing to do that, but they're not going to choose to put him in that position with any designed runs, as far as I can tell.
I'm trying to think if we hit on everything. I saw Frank do the electric slide like that. I saw the double
Danye was vibing out there.
Yeah,
we're talking about dance moves today.
Yeah. Low key, man, he had a good game. I mean, just
to get those 2 tackles for loss right out of the gate.
He did not look good the last 2 games. I was worried about his production. He had that huge brace.
I mean, the thing he had last week was, it's crazy to how do you go from that and playing through it, and you guys weren't there, but it seemed like getting loose on the sideline at halftime. Like, it was really bothering him, whatever that was, and that doesn't seem like a thing that you just shake off in a week. But he looked fine.
So you have Pick Cage, his backup, down for probably the season.
I saw him over there in a sling.
Yeah, he had surgery this last week, so, you know, obviously concerned there. He looked good. I like he crawls on the field like a dog after his tackle for loss play.
Yeah, I'm trying
celebration.
To think. I know last week we saw Marcellus Wilkerson out there a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Danye just played every snap this week or if I just missed it, but I don't know who.
Pee
Wee was out there a decent
amount.
Yeah, he played some snaps too. So those are the 3 guys at that position, I would think, at this point. And it's probably going to be Danye and Pee Wee for the most part. But the more snaps we talked about this at the very beginning of the year. It's like Trey Moore and Danye are kind of your 2 most important players.
It's like your quarterback on defense.
Because not just because Danye is a little bit less of a pass rusher the way it's structured, but those are like the most important position, and also the positions where we have the most questions about the guys behind them. Now it turns out Jamori has put together a pretty good season.
Yeah.
I don't know that the backups to Danye have shown us anything different than what we expected, but those guys being healthy is absolutely critical. Whereas you lose a guy in the defensive line, like Matterson last week, for instance. You can take that because you have 9 guys there you feel really good about. Those outside linebacker spots are a lot harder to replace. And even at corner, because we've seen, not having Dumas there, Zay Frazier hasn't suited up yet this year. There seems to be some kind of appeal waiver or something they're going through that they haven't been able to get clearance on, and they haven't really expanded for us. And I know I've said the cornerbacks group is really strong, but that's one where the depth is not great. You're relying on those top 3 guys, and they've played well for the most part. Dewan's maybe the last couple of weeks, some things have shown up.
And I think without not throwing anybody individually under the bus, you could pinpoint those positions as where some of the breakdowns have been, the missed assignments. Kind of reading
we see some
lines.
stuff with safety too a little bit.
Yeah.
But generally, I don't know, I didn't feel like today. I mean, they get got on all these gadget plays, it feels like. But other than that, it
Yeah.
seems like they're pretty sound,
Yeah.
at least today.
Good third down conversion or stop percentage
Yeah.
today.
Like we mentioned at the top, the only thing that I don't seem to, it seems like some of the angles they're taking are very weird.
Yeah.
In this game, it felt like they were giving guys the sideline.
Yeah.
For significant gains, not really using it for leverage as much as just like there's your path. And I don't know. I'd have to watch it back and see if it was as weird as it felt in the moment. But other than that, it felt like generally like coverage wise, they didn't have guys running wide open. It was just after the catch that there were some issues.
Yep. 20 points, solid outing overall, I think. And,
Again, when it's this kind of offense, that's all you need.
Yeah.
It was more, everything was amplified by how bad the offense was early in the year.
Yep. Well, I think that'll wrap it up, Greg. It is almost 2 a.m. here in the Alamo Dome. And
They left the lights on for us.
yeah, and the air condition. We appreciate that. I think that'll wrap it up. The Roadrunners are 2-0 in league play, 3-3 overall. Greg, enjoy sunny Florida next week. I'll be in San Antonio covering the game, and we'll check back next week. Thanks for watching, guys. Greg, Luca, Express News, JJ Perez. Appreciate you guys.